What's your best true spooky story? Serious. While at uni, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on. So the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire and the lanterns which were dotted about gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so curious. We turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. Not just no people or horses. There was no field. Just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road. As we simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks. And so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 AM, I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom. Mom. Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 AM again, my dog had started to whimper at outdoors, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know the feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back. I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed and I felt the f-king bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys. Almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. At the time I was around 14. I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 AM because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up. And I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on. 3:30 am. And I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad and it was gone. I went to use the bathroom at work and when I entered, there was no one in there. The bathroom has 4 urinals and 4 stalls, 1 handicap. And I did not see any feet in any of the stalls. I took up my normal spot inside one stall and was doing my business when I heard the sound of someone peeing into one of the urinals. But no one had entered the bathroom. The door is heavy and loud when it closes, so I would have heard someone entering. After a normal amount of time, the peeing stopped, and I heard a few footsteps, but the door never opened. When I finished up, I did a cursory look and there was no one in the bathroom. It's a ridiculous story, but I definitely heard a pee ghost. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time. And sometimes a knife or two will end up in the wrong slot in the drawer. But the strangest, scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in. There were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress, watching a video on my phone, when I get the pins and needles feeling of my feet falling asleep. Except it wasn't on my feet. It was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, "Good night," turned off my light and tried to sleep. When I woke up, my closet door was ajar. But other than that, everything was otherwise untouched. I guess whoever my unseen roommate is just wanted to check out who I was on my first night. Mine is a bit different. Me and friend of mine live in rural Ireland. We were going for a walk in the grounds behind a castle. As we were coming to the end of our walk, it was pretty dark and we glanced into an area that has a well and something caught our eyes. He stayed a bit further back, walked over and looked into the well only to see two yellow eyes looking up at me and a sinister looking grin from a girl with dark hair. Naturally we ran like little girls. We were followed by this little girl all night. We went to graveyard and found her watching us while she sat on a tree. We went under a bridge a few miles outside of the village and she was standing at the other end of the bridge and slowly started walking toward us. We both saw her every single time. Explanation is easy. We dropped a shitty load of LSD and were hallucinating. Just fascinating that we both saw the exact same thing. I never told him what I saw in the well until he told me what he had seen. It matched. I tell this story a lot and no one ever believes me, but I know what I saw. I was staying at my grandparents for the summer when I was 14. It was 11 PM and I was thirsty. Go out to the kitchen and see who I thought was my granddad sitting at the table eating a sandwich. I say hello, grab a glass of water and head back to my room. My grandfather comes out of his room and asks who I was talking to. I turn around and no one was there. It freaked me out, still does to this day. I lived next to a facility for developmentally handicapped people for 3 years. Every day I would jog past this historical marker on their property. One day I decided to take a break. I love history, so I finally walked over and read it. It was a dedication to a mass grave of 300 people for what used to be the grounds for a hospital for the insane. I nearly shat my tracksuit. I have a bunch, but I think the best one I have actually happened to my mom. We lived in a very creepy, very old house when I was little. One day my mom was cleaning my little brother's room while we were at school and every single one of his electronic toys turned on all at once. 2 of them did not have batteries in them. She was so freaked out she had us camp out in the living room for 3 days cause she didn't want my brother alone in his room. Up until we moved. That would occasionally happen. Either 1 or 2 toys at a time. I'm sure this will get buried, but I've got one. It's more bittersweet spooky than spooky. But here goes. My ex had this lamp that she had on the island in our kitchen. She turned it on pretty much every night and in the mornings to make coffee. It was a pretty solid little lamp. I brought my cat to live with us late in our relationship because she had dogs and my cat was pretty up there in age and not used to dogs. So I tried to spare her little heart from that shock. She came to love laying down in the spot by where that lamp plugged into an outlet on the wall of the island. She died soon after I brought her over. And I was absolutely heartbroken. I had a hard time accepting the loss. About a week after my cat died, my ex was grinding coffee in a little electric grinder and I heard her shriek from the other room. I rushed over to see what was going on. And she told me she felt something cold pass by her feet. Then the light on the lamp started flickering. She tried to show me again the flickering, but it didn't happen. I just chalked it up to her being weird at 6 AM. A couple of days later, she asked me to make coffee for her. I grabbed the grinder, Flick on the lamp to see what I was doing. And sure enough, the same thing happened to me. A cold wind whipped past me like a cat running around my feet. Then the light on the lamp flickered before I could even get the grinder going. It never happened before or after. Despite the hundreds of times I'd used that grinder in the same outlet as the lamp. I like to think it was my little girl saying goodbye one last time. I never see these until my post will be at the end, but this was weird. My wife and I were having a great weekend in Las Vegas when my father-in-law passed away in the early morning hours. We get the call and haul ass to get back to the rest of the family. After a couple of hours the family is all together and talking, sharing memories when we arrive. Shortly after we arrive it gets brought up, how are we going to share this news with our niece, who was in prison at the time? While trying to figure it out, a call comes from out of nowhere. It's our niece and she asks what happened to grandpa. She had a dream that he visited her and said goodbye. She freaks and calls us. Weird. About 2 months after my father passed, my mom and all of my brothers and sisters were sitting around the dining room table. We were just talking about the past and sharing stories. We were talking about my father and suddenly the globe around the light on the ceiling fell straight down on the center of the table. It didn't break or roll or move at all after hitting the table. Scared the shit out of all of us. I came home from work one day to grab my spare tires. My sister was away at school 7 hours away and neither of my parents were going to be home for another 5 hours at minimum. I ran in, changed my clothes, grabbed my tires, then drove to a garage to get them installed. I got home 2 hours later and as I walked into the living room, there was a chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway and was facing the front door. I thought nothing of it but didn't recognize the chair as being one that we owned. It was a standard metal folding chair that you would buy for a couple bucks at a retail store. I folded it up and propped it up against my dad's workbench in our garage. My mom gets home a couple hours later and I ask her in passing why she left a metal chair in the middle of the hallway. She tells me we don't own any metal chairs and that she hadn't been home up until an hour ago. I told her I came home and there was a metal chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway after I had gotten back from the garage. She told me to show her the chair and when I went out to the garage to show it to her, it was gone. I looked high and low for that metal chair but couldn't find it. I swore to her that I wasn't on drugs and that I wasn't imagining things. She thought what I was telling her was strange but didn't pay much attention to it. I never saw that chair again, nor do I know where it came from or where it went. This just happened to me 2 days ago. I was walking into the house after work around 6 PM, so it was already mostly dark. And suddenly the entire sky lit up bright green. And there was a super loud zap sound just like a movie laser or something. Right over my head. So loud that I hit the deck and then F-king tore ass back into the house. One of my roommates was cooking dinner and I was like, what the FCK? Did you F-king see that? But he didn't. We went back outside. No transformers near or out. No house's electricity out. No sign of disturbance at all. Now I'm a rational grown man. A believer in science and always that there must be a rational explanation for this guy. But this was truly a mindfuck and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. To this day I don't know if I was dreaming or not. But I clearly heard someone gently knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. I live alone. I got lost in the woods in North Carolina during a game of paintball. It was broad daylight. But the woods were really thick and every tree looked exactly the same. It probably only lasted 1-2 minutes. But it felt like I was screaming help for hours. The worst part? Turns out I wasn't even lost. I was maybe 10 feet from everyone else. And they all heard me screaming help. But they thought I was acting as a decoy. Like what the actual fuck? Who hears someone crying for help and ignores them? Jesus. Dad. I personally have quite a few spooky stories, but my mum has a good one, so I will tell hers. When she was younger, her and a group of friends were driving down a desolate road at night and there was a house that they passed that had a window lit up upstairs, so they slowed down to look and she said there was a lantern in the window and a man and a woman sat facing each other. She then said that a second man wearing a top hat came into view. walked up behind the woman and started strangling her. At this point my mum and her friends freaked out and drove off. When they went back to see what had happened, they drove up to where they had seen it happen, and it wasn't even a window they had seen, it was a plastic sheet, so they didn't know what to make of it, but they all ended up agreeing they had seen a ghost. I was driving at night on an unfamiliar forested road during a thick fog 30 km out of Vancouver, Canada. Suddenly we were going through an old timmy town with tin sign advertisements for 1920s type products, Chesterfield cigs, etc., with similar era buildings. Then we drove under a sign saying you are now leaving the United States. Seeing I didn't think we had entered the States, it was quite unsettling. It was a movie set. This isn't a super spooky story, but I sure was spooked when it happened. My mom used to clean the house of an elderly couple. They didn't have any kids, so their house was empty aside from them. The husband ended up dying of lung cancer, and about a week after the service we were at their house cleaning. I was in their bedroom and my mom was in their restroom. I had my back turned to the bed, and off to my left was a mirror that they had that was facing the bed. While cleaning I kinda half turned and momentarily looked into the mirror and see the lady's deceased husband standing next to the bed and looking down at it. He then looked up at me through the mirror, so I quickly turned to look at their bed and he was gone. Really freaked me out at the time, and I quickly joined my mom in the restroom. Shared this on another thread, but equally as relevant here. My mom just last week told me a story about when I was a kid. I had to be 4 or 5. We went to visit my grandmother's grave a state over. My mother and I lived with her and my grandfather until I was 3 and my grandmother died. My mom said my grandma and I were super close. We traveled from Indiana to Illinois and visited her grave, out in the middle of nowhere off of a gravel road with a forest just past the cemetery. My mom said I jumped up after visiting her grave site and started to run to the trees. My mom was only 21-22 at the time, so she could keep up with me, and asked me where I was going, and I said I'm going to play with Mamor. Look, there's Mamor. Double quote. She then said she scooped me up and took me to the car kicking and screaming because I couldn't understand why I couldn't play with my grandma. Then she told me that right after my grandma died when I was 3 that I would lay in bed and talk to her. Weird. When I was about 10, 4 of our cousins lived with us. And I had 2 siblings, so that means there were 7 of us. We were in the family room sitting in a circle playing a game. My parents were out doing whatever adult errands they had that day. We all heard a voice call out Zachary. It was the voice of our grandmother, and one of my cousins was named Zach. No one heard my parents come home, and they didn't mention they would be getting our grandma, so we all ran out of the room to greet her. We quickly realized my parents were not home. And our grandmother wasn't there either. We even went outside to check, and there was no one in our neighbors' yards either. We were baffled. It was one of many paranormal instances in that house. But this one was experienced by 7 people. Grandpa was in police and tragically expired in my arms when he fell from the stairs. He was very proud that I had joined the government services as well. And the quote "behave like an officer" was something like an inside joke between the 2 of us. A few years later I'm in my car and it's freezing outside. There was a police check and I saw the cop who was inspecting the cars wasn't wearing any jacket. Immediately made me think of Grandpa. With all the cops around in their uniforms and all. My turn comes and I roll down my window and gently remind the officer to put on his jacket. He looks in my eyes and smiles and says, "Now that's spoken like an officer," and tells me to go. He said it in exactly his voice. His style. It had been years since I resigned from the services, and there was no way this cop could have guessed I had been an officer. The house I grew up in was fairly old and my dad did some serious renovations to it. I always got the creeps from the attic, which was a full 3rd story, and eventually my dad fixed it up as a kind of 2-bedroom apartment for me and my older brother. One night when I was maybe 13. While everyone else was asleep, I heard 3 loud bangs on the wall outside of my room, right next to my head. Important note. The stairs were on the other side of the wall in a traditional Victorian style, some steps. Then a landing. 180-degree pivot. More steps. So the point on the wall where the bangs were coming from was about 8 feet off the ground. Directly after the bangs, the touch lamp next to my bed started going crazy. It had 4 settings: off, dim, bright, brightest, and it cycled through them without being touched for about 30 seconds while out in the big, open living area. Our stereo turned on at full volume, blaring some crazy punk album I had just discovered. I quickly ran out of my room and turned the stereo off, not wanting to wake anyone else in my family, and then just kind of sat in my room with the light on until I could fall back asleep. This was probably the creepiest experience I ever had in the house, but definitely not the only one. I had a recurring scary dream. In it, I was at my grandparents' farmhouse, which is over 200 years old. I was dressed in Victorian clothes and in the fields and walking down a strange path. But it felt like I had been there many times. I walked through the woods and eventually came to a cabin. It felt eerie, like a presence of death. I opened the door and there was death all around me. Cries of children filled the air. I had this dream for months. I eventually ended up visiting my grandparents on spring break or something, and decided to follow my dream's path. I ended up at a cabin. It looked exactly like in my dream. I was terrified. I called my friend to try to shake my fear and cautiously opened the door. There was a burned car seat and burned children's toys scattered around the ground. I felt an awful sense of dread and backed up slowly while trying to catch my breath. I've since tried to look up missing children in the area and have found nothing. I have no idea what it all means. But as soon as I found that cabin, the dreams stopped. Not my experience, but my dad's. He is a nurse, so he has told me some pretty scary stories. Probably one of the scariest was when this one guy was dying from liver failure because he was a drunk his entire life. So there wasn't anything anybody could do except wait. Now, this guy was a hardcore atheist, according to my dad, and was not shy in making it known. So when the guy began to pass away, suddenly he gripped the sides of the bed really tight, and his eyes got really wide, like, oh shit, kind of wide. And he started yelling, "Don't let them take me," over and over again. My dad said even after he was dead they had a hard time getting his hands to unclutch the sides of the bed. I swear we ran into a man from another time. My stepsister and I were like maybe 9 and 11 years old, and we had ventured like 10 kilometers from the house into the forest to explore and play. Grew up rural. This is just what you do. We were way off the trail amongst these enormous valleys, by Ontario standards. Like the type that you can't just walk straight up because it's too steep. So this isn't an easy place to really get to, and there are very few houses that back onto this particular piece of land. We were walking about and chatting when all of a sudden this man appears like 3 feet from us wearing a cowboy hat and a suede-like vest. He walked by, again, not anywhere near any trail, and didn't say anything. Then all of a sudden we didn't see him anymore. He was heading downhill, so we should have had a good vantage point to continue seeing him, but he was gone. You'd think if you randomly came across any other person in such a place you'd be like, oh, hey, what's up? Or hey, have a nice walk or something. But he didn't even look at us. Just walked by silently, then disappeared. At the time it was like meh, strange, and we continued playing around, but a few years later we realized how strange that was. Just inexplicable and odd. It was almost 1 in the morning, and a strange man with a white t-shirt knocks on my door asking for help. After quick deliberation where my father went outside to talk to the man, he told me to lock the doors and get the kids into the room. Upon closer inspection, the man had a faint smear of blood on the t-shirt. When I asked him if he needed aid for the suspected wound, he told me that it wasn't his blood. 5 minutes later, my mom calls the cops. 10 minutes later, when the cops came, it was an entire squad. I didn't get to see the action because I was inside of a bedroom huddling the kids into a circle while cop lights flashed brightly through the window. I heard screaming from the cops to tell the man to stop, a barking canine, and a loud boom. But it was most likely the taser. Afterwards, more cops came to clean the blood off our walkway. And because the man came to our house, We had the right to obtain an explanation. The man is a wanted serial killer from Georgia. I live in Texas. When I was 12, my brother was born to my dad and stepmom. We were in the middle of moving to our new house, which was built in the 1890s. My dad had done a lot of remodeling work on it and had uncovered old baby toys in a pantry that was sealed up under the staircase. We had finished moving in and getting settled when we had strange things happening. The rocking chair in my brother's nursery would sometimes be moving when you went into the room. We could hear my brother as he got older. We could hear him babble at people who weren't there, and often if you went and got him up from his crib, he would smell heavily of older women's perfume. When we looked into it, we found the house had been owned in the 50s by a couple who couldn't have kids, and the wife died in the house. After my brother turned 2, it stopped happening. My stepmom swears that it was the lady who couldn't have children and we helped her come to peace. My family members tell this story about me that I have no memory of, where I had woken them up around 2 AM one morning because I was screaming for someone to come and save me. My parents had rushed out of bed and ran into the kitchen where I was standing, and my sister shortly followed after them. They said I was holding a knife, trembling and screaming for someone to save me as I was pointing it at my room across the house. My eyes had never been so wide, and I seemed to be completely awake but couldn't hear anyone. This had gone on for nearly 20 minutes with my family screaming at me, too scared to come near me, until I had dropped the knife, but my arms to the side, and walked to my room still wide-eyed and fell asleep. This scarred my entire family, and when I woke up the next morning to hear about it, I had no idea anything had even happened. I guess I just sleepwalk sometimes. When I was in elementary school during English, our teacher asked us to write scary stories. One girl wrote a story of taking pictures with a Polaroid and finding her dead grandpa in the picture. He had committed suicide in the garage, I think. The teacher said it was too dark and why would he make that up? Well, the girl brought the picture in. My teacher took the photo with a face on that basically said, "Let me see this null shit." Well, my teacher went white and walked out of the room. The girl went home early and my teacher left early as well. I wish I got to see the picture, but I didn't. The scary part was her reaction. I knew it was spooky. I have a lot more from this house, which I recently moved out of. This was one of the last encounters there. One night my daughter wasn't feeling well and she asked for me to sleep in her bed with her. Planning to sneak back in bed with my husband once she fell asleep, I left the TV on a boring channel. Unfortunately, I was tired too and promptly fell asleep with her. I woke up startled, not sure if because I hadn't planned on falling asleep, or if it was due to an eerie feeling, with the glow of an infomercial upon us. I look at the foot of my bed and catch a dark figure in the act of reaching toward my daughter. Without even thinking of what the FCK I'm looking at, I shout, "Don't you dare!" And the figure sits back immediately. I remember thinking its sitting posture was akin to a dog's mannerisms. I reach to my right to yank the bedside lamp on and look back to the figure, but it was gone. I'm 100% sure I was awake during this and I was freely moving and speaking. So don't think it's sleep paralysis. In reference to the other stories I have, I can update here. They're in my post history as well. My wife and I, at the time girlfriend, had one of the scariest moments of our lives that, to this day, haunts me. We were in my car ready to leave and we heard a strong clicking noise. It was coming from her side and I thought her knee was holding the lock button. It was a rapid clicking and didn't stop. The longer it went on, the more I realized it was the door handle being pulled up. Then the car started to shake as if someone was pulling the door handle up as hard as they could. We both looked at each other and told each other to cut it out. Finally it stops. I get outside and look around and under the car, nothing. We of course looked around as it was happening and saw nothing. What scares me the most is that we were in a well-lit area, right under the street lamp. We could see clearly all around us. My wife hates when I bring this story up, and when she saw me writing this she got mad. This just happened at Thanksgiving this year. We have 2 kids, and the 5-month-old sleeps in our room. Wife went out Black Friday shopping, so I stayed home with the kids. About 12 AM the 5-month-old wakes up screaming. I comfort him and I'm walking back and forth in our pitch black room when all of a sudden I feel a rush of air and see what I believe is my 2-year-old standing there. It wasn't him. It was what I can describe as a white light mist shaped like my son standing there. When I blinked it was gone. Actually, when I saw it I gasped for air and all the hair on my body stood on end. Put my son back to sleep and was sort of confused, scared the rest of the night. Ever since that night stuff has been happening. Toys are constantly turning on when I'm near them. Lights are switching on off when we aren't in rooms. And I can feel a presence in my bedroom. It's tough to describe. I haven't seen it since. But I can always feel it there. It seems to be attached, focused on my son. One night my wife and I were talking about laying some pipe when all of a sudden a vibrator in her drawer went on full throttle. House was built in the 40s and I have no history on it. Told this elsewhere. But this happened when I was like 10 or 11. I had a weird episode of sleepwalking where I woke up out by the school I was going to at the time. Naked. In the middle of fall. Only, I wasn't quite awake. It was like my eyes were stuck shut. Everything was weird and red and wobbly. Kind of like the final boss from Earthbound. It still looked like my town. But it was just completely effing wrong. Red and black everywhere. Nobody out on the street. All the lights off. And I felt something on the back of my neck. I walked back to my house and tried waking up my dad. Seeing if he could help. Then, I actually woke up. By his bed. And my feet were dirty. I've never told my parents about this because I was too freaked out by it. I don't remember sleepwalking to the school. Only half lucidly walking back. It was not a fun time. Was in my college house alone in the evening. All roommates were back home with family out of state. I take a shower and when I open the bathroom boot afterwards. The ottoman from the chair in the living room on the other side of the house was in front of the door. As I'm walking back to the living room, I notice all the coats that had been hung up on the hooks in the front hall are gone and there are tennis rackets hung up in their place. The tennis rackets had been under a bunch of crap in the front hall closet. So I look in the closet and all the coats are hung on hangers, including my own. Which I had put on the hook not an hour ago. And I never hung my coat in the closet. Close bracket. Several years ago when my son was young I was sitting at the computer doing some work when I heard him wake up. He made the tiny whimper sound in the typical toddler. Pathetic sounding cry moan I. So I jumped up to get him. Then I remembered my son was not home. He had been on a sleepover at my parents'. We lived in a slightly older house. Built in the 1940s. There are few weird things that happened there. Close bracket. Not my story but my mother's. Her dad was never a great dad. He was a bit of a drunk and somewhat belligerent. But she knew that he did really love his daughter. I don't remember when she said he divorced my grandmother but it wasn't a good time and he had a new girlfriend rather quickly. But he would always stop by on her birthday and get her something. The last time my mom saw her dad was on her 14th birthday and he died sometime later that year. But she swears up and down that on the morning of her 15th birthday while she was brushing her hair that this little music box that he bought her on her 14th birthday started to play on its own. It only managed the first 6 or 7 notes and then stopped. But she swears it had to be her dad wishing her happy birthday. My brother's first house. 50 years old. Suburbia single story. Saw my brother's pregnant wife open the door to her bedroom. Close it behind her and walk into the baby's room, waited about an hour. Checked to see why she was still in there. Nobody. They went to a doctor's appointment. I was home alone. Went to go to the bathroom. The door is locked. I knock on it thinking I was not home alone. No answer. I use the second bathroom. Door also locked. I knocked on it, hear the lock open and enter an empty room. I ask them about it and my sister-in-law freaks out. She is Indian Hindu and believe ghosts are a bad omen or something. I never mention it again to them. I must have been about 8 at the time. Couple of friends and I were spending our Saturday at another friend's house. So a little backstory, she had recently moved into this house. It had a walled off room, which is creepy in itself. Why does a room need walled off? It had a window. Her dad was planning on knocking into it that weekend. So we were playing outside the house and she looks up to see her grandma at this window. We all seen her and got excited because her grandma would make us the best butterscotch pudding. So we all ran inside to find her mum crying and her dad comforting her. Turns out the grandma had just died in a freak accident. We just assumed that her dad had already knocked into the room but it hadn't been touched. I have many creepy stories. Living in Scotland, a lot of houses are old, so noises etc can generally be put down to that, but this one stuck with me. I can still see her face in that window. When my cousin and I were 14-15, we both got to know a site where a spirit would answer all your questions. My cousin found out about this at school and knew it was a trick. You could type the answer over the question without the other person knowing, and wanted to use it to trick me. I didn't know the trick myself and got a bit suspicious after all of the things I asked were answered correctly. So I asked it to show a sign of it being present. My cousin jokingly typed "turn around." We both did, and only a few seconds later one of the plastic birds my parents had at the time started moving its wings. We were both in the living room with my parents. My cousin and I both freaked out and checked whether there was anything that could have made it move, but we couldn't find anything. Stopped using the site straight after that. I was around 9 years old sleeping over at my friend's house. He was around 9 as well. Early in the morning we saw a huge circle out the window. It looked like the sun does early in the morning, but it was around 15x the size of the sun and a little less bright. We talked to his douchebag father the next day and he said it was the farms behind his house burning vegetation. But I really didn't believe that at all. It was a large circle like the sun. I once saw a demon-like creature in my parents' room when I was really young. It wasn't paralysis. I was totally lucid and able to move. And really wasn't even that afraid. As I was so young, I didn't immediately associate things that looked scary as bad, I guess. Also, I'm convinced the apartment I'm living in is haunted. When I first moved in, I kept having nightmares and daytime visions of a girl who'd hung herself in my bathroom. They gradually went away. But ever since I started the process of moving out, I leave in 2 days, things have gotten insane. The closet door keeps opening by itself. I've watched bags in the kitchen and the comforter on my bed shuffle around on their own. I've seen other people in the bathroom mirror. And I've been having increasingly bizarre and vivid nightmares. The one last night involved me getting out of bed, promptly falling back over and having a seizure. Something I'm not prone to at all. And I seriously don't know if it happened for real or not. I think whatever is here is upset that I'm leaving. Funny way of showing it. This happened when I was 13 or 14. During the summer break between grades. I had a habit of staying up until around 7 AM playing computer games. Not even really feeling tired until I saw sunlight outside. The family computer was in the family room, next to the kitchen, with a hallway going to the back of the house. It was about 2 AM. All the lights in the house were off, except for the monitor of the computer. I heard footsteps coming down the hall from the back of the house towards the kitchen, and I figured it was my mom coming out to tell me to go to bed. I turned towards the hallway and put my hand up between my eyes and the monitor so I could see. And this little girl, maybe 7 or 8, came walking out of the hallway. She was barefoot, wore a white nightgown, had her head bowed down like she was looking at the floor, and had long blonde hair which covered her face. I immediately froze with fear, and she turned towards me, lifted her head and stared at me for a second, then lowered her head again, and walked back up the hallway where she came from. My parents have a loose floorboard in the hallway that creaks every time someone steps on it. And I heard that board as whatever it was that I just saw walked back up the hallway. After a minute just staring at the entrance to the hallway, I turned on all the lights in the house, one by one, leapfrogging my way back to my bedroom. My father was in the hospital, dying of cancer. My immediate family was there in the room with him, except for my 3-year-old nephew. One of our friends from church had taken him to an empty room down the hall to try and get him to go to sleep in one of the empty beds. My father passed away around 2 AM that morning. And at that exact time the friend told us that my nephew sat straight up in bed all of a sudden and said clearly, "Bye grandpa." So my dad wanted to say goodbye to his only grandchild before he left. Was riding some trails with my friend and my brother a week or so after a controlled burn. So it was a big empty field at the time. Saw a man in the distance in a red sweater shouting a name. We thought he was looking for his dog. We decided to go and help him. We ride past a small portion of wooded area that was still left and lost sight of him for about 30 seconds but could still hear him calling the name. Once we got into the clearing again he was nowhere to be seen. Keep in mind there is no way he cold ran into the wooded area as he was at least 200 yards from it. We stopped and looked at each other and before we could say anything the bright blue sunny sky turned black and it started to thunder bad and the wind was insane. We hauled us home and it was sunny by the house about 3 miles away. Crazy. This will probably get buried but here goes. Back in the 90s I was in the living room playing a game on the computer. My dad came in and talked to me for about a minute then went back to his room to go to bed. I went back to playing the game. A few minutes later I get this feeling that something is looking at me. I look up and in the same spot where my dad was standing was in a form in the shape of my dad. I could see through it. It looked like iridescent smoke. I startled and it immediately disappeared. A long time ago when I was just starting kindergarten I would ride the afternoon bus home. For the first few weeks I would see my grandpa on the side of the road by the entrance of my neighborhood. When I would get home I told my mom all about it. How he just stood there and waved at me. All I would get was perplexed looks. The reasoning for this is that my grandfather had committed suicide 2 weeks before school started. What I didn't find out until recently was that he had died right by the pond that was a few feet from the road. I was visiting my single aunt who lived completely alone. She didn't even own a pet. I had fallen asleep on the couch in the dark with the remote in my hand. In the middle of the night I cracked my eyes open to see a figure hunched over the TV. At that moment they manually switched the TV off. Confused. And with the remote still in my hand, I quickly turned it back on. The person sighed and switched it off again. I protested with "Hey." And this deep, angry male voice hisses back at me to "Shut the FCK up bitch." I froze completely solid in the darkness and heard them shuffle off. I reluctantly stood up and bolted to my aunt's bedroom to explain everything. She got her gun and we looked all over the house. The bolt locks on the front and back door were still latched from the inside with no sign of anyone coming into the house at all. And most importantly, there was like 2 feet of undisturbed snow surrounding the perimeter of her home. She told me it was likely a dream but I am absolutely positive it wasn't. That man's voice still haunts me.